Thank you, Elena, for agreeing to take part in the European Oral History Criminology project, in which there is an interview with criminologists around Europe. And I wish to begin this interview asking you about your career. And I know that you are a lawyer, and I like to know how you became interested in criminology.
Okay, so thank you, Pepe. As you know, after studying law, I asked for a scholarship in the United States. I had the Fulbright scholarship, and I went to the University of California, Santa Barbara. And at that time, criminal law had a very local, national character, even more than now. So therefore, with this scholarship, we thought, okay, let's try and see something close to criminal law, and the closest it came was criminology. So this is how I ended up in criminology and in Santa Barbara. Actually, it was sort of a shock, because criminology in Santa Barbara, as in the United States, usually was in the sociology department, and I had only studied law. So it was sort of a cultural shock, not only because going to the States, but also going to a sociology department. And there in Santa Barbara that year, I was really lucky, because Stanley Kubrick was there as a visiting professor. He was taking 1 year off, and he was there for the whole year. And well, he was sort of, I don't know if to call it a mentor, but he certainly guided me through that whole year in Santa Barbara, saying what are the discussions, what you should read, what are people talking about. So it was a really interesting year, following a little bit, Stanley Kubrick's suggestions and about crime policy discussions. It was at that time, more than criminology and crime, it was crime policy that occupied the scene at that time, right? What to do with prison, how to reduce prison, alternatives to prison, abolitionism. I mean, we're speaking end of the 80s.
What do you learn from Stanley Kubrick?
What did I learn from Stanley Kubrick? I learned a lot from Stanley Kubrick. From Stanley Kubrick, I learned, actually the first thing I learned is not so much academic as personal, probably. Stanley Kubrick was a really, really balanced man. I mean, he really was respectful to all the ideas. And if you would tell him this is right, he would say, yes, but you should consider. And then you would say, oh, don't you think this is great? Yes, I agree, but you should consider. He really was very respectful with all the ideas. I think he was on the other hand, he was a great reader. He had read everything. So he would say, oh yes, Merton, I mean, he had read all the basic classic books. So yeah, I learned a lot. Not to say sense of humor, which he had a great sense of humor.
I remember that you wrote some papers on alternatives to prison, related with your first papers on criminology.
Because Stanley Kubrick had written this very important book called Visions of Social Control, and this was a book that was very critical towards alternatives to prison, right? Because it was, at that time, criminologists were thinking that prison could disappear. Actually, there was a very famous book by Skull called Decarceration, and we were supposed to see the end of prisons. And then what happened was that there were many alternatives to prison, and criminologists, being as they are always a little bit critical, began to criticize the alternatives. Also, it was the times of Foucault, and Foucault saying, oh, alternatives to prison, they are so intrusive, they make more intrusion, disciplinary, the prison going outside society. So Stanley Kubrick was critical towards alternatives, also. So that's a little bit what he was, telling me that, But as I want to insist, and you also know this because we've discussed this already, that he later wrote a paper saying, cautiously reaffirming alternatives to prison, right? I mean, so he was, of course, critical to alternatives, because alternatives to prison could be very, as we say, very disciplinary, and they have intrusion on the people. But on the other hand, he was, of course, smart enough to see that, of course, they are better than prison.
Exactly. Okay. And after then, you have the influence of Stanley Kubrick, and then you came back to Spain. And then what was, and I remember that many, I think at the beginning of the 90s, you wrote this book on critical criminology. It's called, in English, maybe The Legacy of Critical Criminology.
Critical criminology, yeah.
So explain us something about your motivation to write this, to write this book in this moment.
Okay, the motivation was mainly academic, because I was in Spain, and as you know, in Spain there were not many criminology books translated. Almost none, I think. I mean, I think the only one was the New Criminology, right? The New Criminology. But that was 75, 77 translated. And I thought, actually, I remember that was my question. I said, what happened after the New Criminology? So that was my beginning of conversations with Stan Cohen. What happened after the New Criminology? So he said, oh, this paper and this other paper, and you should read this paper. But it's what I was telling you before. I mean, you could not understand all these papers. There was no major textbook after the New Criminology, at least translated into Spanish. So all these papers, he said, you can't understand those if you don't read Matza. Okay, so I read Matza, right? I read Matza, blah, blah, blah. But you really can't understand Matza unless you take into account what Merton said, you know, and subcultural theory. Well, you know, Parsons, it was like what began as a paper, you know, it took me quite a few years, 2 or 3 years. And actually, I had to go to Jerusalem. And I'm always thankful that he really devoted hours and hours of explaining me all the links between the discussions in the 80s and 90s and how to trace them back to the 60s, 50s, you know. So yeah, that's what I did after. I wrote this book. It was, as I say, it was an academic book. I know the legacy was a way to say, okay, what came after the New Criminology? It sounded terrible, maybe as a title, but I just wanted to, it would have been better to say update.
Critical.
Update of critical criminology.
And what do you think about this book? Looking at this book now, after 30 years, what do you think about the book, about critical criminology? It's quite a long history.
I think it's hard for me. When I read it, the first thing I think is it's a dense book. It's really theoretical. Many people, I think, get it thinking, oh, let's see if we find a pamphlet, but it's quite dense because, as I said, I had to deal with all those theoretical traditions, so it's quite dense. I think I'm happy about the book. I'm happy in the sense it's not an easy book, but it's if somebody wants to trace, as I say, the discussions from the 50s, 60s to the 80s, they might find a good tool there. I put so much emphasis on academic because, it was what I was trying to do. I was trying to do an academic book saying from where all those discussions now in the 80s between alternatives, abolitionism, or we in Spain, Italy, South America call garantism, from where do all those cultural traditions come? So, as I said, I don't think it's a book that's, that will have that great impact, but it's a useful tool as a history of ideas,
Okay, and maybe we change a little and we move more to recent history. And I like to know what are your more recent research. I wish that you can explain your current research interest in the previous years, maybe more.
Okay, yeah. So. After this first stage of dealing with criminological ideas and more crime policy ideas, another big piece of research was probably criminal records. I joke today saying that today is the last day I speak on criminal records. Take my word for this. I've been working on criminal records for the last 10 years. And here the key figure is Jim Jacobs from NYU. This has been also a very interesting, fascinating discussion because criminal records is so different how North Americans see it and how Europeans see it. To put it very simple, in the United States, the majority of people think you have like a sort of a right to know if somebody has a criminal record. Whereas usually in Europe, you think you have, you know, criminal records are private or confidential. You shouldn't disclose if somebody has a criminal record. So the differences, and again, I mean, why are those cultural differences? I mean, I have been working on this for the last 10 years, and it has been really interesting. So this has been my current research until today. I'm not going to work anymore in criminal records. What I'm working then next now is prisons, because I like to study prisons. I've always studied prisons. I've been wrestling with prisons for very long, but usually more from how societies use prison. You know, I mean, we've been very concerned about big imprisonment rates, low, how to reduce it, how to use alternatives. But at one point I got more interested also in how is life inside prison, you know. So I was inspired in this. I was lucky enough to get this survey that Alison Liebling does, the Measuring Quality of Prison Life. And that was a really good tool because it enabled us to go inside prisons with this survey. And this is what I plan to do in my next 10 years.
What do you think about do you think the knowledge we have on prisons now, comparing with the knowledge of the approach we have 20 years ago, it has changed?
Sure. Yeah, we're all we're all there. At least, yes, no. Okay, yeah, no, definitely. Yes and no. Okay, let's try to say yes and no. Yes, it has changed because the only thought that we could be going inside prisons to make a survey, that's already, you know, I mean, we grew up in dictatorship. There was no way that we were easily allowed to go into prisons. So many things have changed, right? In this sense, it has changed.
More research, you mean? We can do
more research, definitely. I mean, we have changed, but the administration has also changed because, you know, I mean, now they trust us to go inside prisons. They know that, you know, we won't, make a bomb out of our interview. So yes, that's the part that has changed. You're right. The part that has not changed, to tell you the truth, is I know it's a truth, but when you go into prison, I mean, I know that you don't like this sentence, what I'm going to say, but it's quite, you know, a prison is a prison. I mean, there is no good prison. I mean, I can't believe that we will improve or achieve a good prison. We will achieve them better, you know, I mean, they're better, but even the better prison, I mean, what a punishment has our society discovered? So if the question is that if in the bottom line, you know, it's like, have I changed my attitude towards prisons? Then the answer is probably no. I mean, I really don't think that's a good punishment. I don't think it's a good invention. I don't. Of course, we don't have alternative. I agree. Of course, that's always when the students ask you, right? What will you do instead? What I don't know. But yeah, let's go back to what abolitionists would say. You know, at least what I would do is only imprison 100 and not 100,000.
You mean it's the importance of alternatives?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
So yes and no. Yes, it has changed.
It has changed, okay. Maybe we change a little we change the subject, not to your research, but I like it that you make some kind of explain us what do you think about the Spanish criminology. How do you see your colleagues? How do you see research in Spain? How do you see the evolution of criminology in these 30 or 40 years? What do you think about that? How do you see criminology comparing with how was criminology when you started your career in criminology, and how you see criminology now? Do you think it has evolved? Do you think now we have better criminology in Spain, better criminologists?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen expansion. I mean, when we began, I think it was you and me, we were 2, and now probably there are 200. Yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job. Pretty good job in the sense that we have a Spanish Society of Criminology. I think it's quite, it integrates everybody more or less ideologically, psychologists, different professions. We have few sociologists, but that's because sociology is not that strong in Spain. It's, you know, it's a pretty good job. This society is what you also said, that, you know, it's more empirically oriented. It's not so much lawyer from where we all come, you know. It's pretty good. I mean, there's a strong discrepancy, although, in the amount of criminology we have on the academic level and the lack of professional jobs that we have in Spain. You know, I mean, you know that even the people that do a PhD have very few prospects of jobs, not to say of all the graduates of criminology. So there is a discrepancy about the amount of criminology and the scarce capacity of the labor market to absorb them. But I think this is quite maybe general with other countries in Europe. I don't know how it will evolve.
And given that we are in this European society, do you think it was, for us, it has been we have an impact of being in the European society? Do you think it's good for us that many Spanish criminologists go to the European society? Do you think it has the impact of Europe on Spain? There is some impact on that, on Spanish criminology?
Yeah. The European society, I think it's really good. It gives us ideas. For example, I mean, as I mentioned, my last research is, you know, probably just the replication of what UK has done, and I came to know this a little bit also through ESC. So it gives us ideas, certainly. I think also it's quite remarkable how many Spanish criminologists begin to be abroad, you know, in other European countries. So I think the European society is nice in communicating all the European countries. It's also quite incredible still how much knowledge we lack in all European countries, you know. I mean, when I go to the United States, people ask me, so what do you do in Europe? You know, I always say, yeah, well, I don't know what they do in Europe. You know, I know what we do in Spain. But I mean, we really still lack, I mean, a whole agenda of research to know what is being done in Europe. You know, but I think, yeah, the European Society of Criminology is, you know, could be maybe more aspirational, but it has a nice influence on the different countries.
Do you think we will have an European criminology, like an American criminology? Doing some kind of research in Europe, not only in one country? There
have been some books, you know, European penology, European prisons, so
has changed, no?
Yeah, exactly.
Comparing with, it was more local maybe when you were starting.
Right. No, I agree. You know, Europe is more in our minds now. If you remember the first book, I think it was you who mentioned, the first book we wrote on alternatives to prison, we didn't even mention Europe.
No.
Terrible. So I mean, probably that we have Europe in our head in the sense of the European prison rules, the European court. You know, I mean, all this.
Do you feel like an European criminologist or like a Spanish criminologist?
No, of course, European criminology. And just as I say, I'm embarrassed when they say, in Europe, how did you do this? Because I think, I don't know, you know, I mean, I'm really telling them how we do it in Spain, and I always add the caution of saying, I think it's more or less the same in Europe, you know. But
maybe in 20 years it will change.
Yeah, maybe, right. Yeah, I agree.
We will be in Europe, not in...
Yeah, it's a good prospect. I agree. Maybe.
Okay, Elena, maybe we change, because I think there is another dimension of your work that I think is relevant, that we didn't mention before. I remember that you wrote also a book on gender and gender issues and critical criminology. And I'd like to know what was your ideas on that, if you can explain some ideas of what is the relation, because it was exactly the title of the book, the relation with critical criminology and the approach to the to gender issues. And this was maybe if you can say something on that, because there is an issue, you know perfectly that in Spain there is a big issue about, it's a very politically issue, the idea of how we react against gender violence. Maybe, and I don't know, I remember that in your book you have some vision that critical criminology maybe is was not in favor of some more punitive policies, or this is very controversial in Spain. I don't know if you can say something on that.
It is difficult because what I'm going to say, it's not really Spanish, but it's almost universal. But it is true that at one point, also around the 80s, I think, it's women movements get very strong on the agenda. Crimes against women, violence against women, and gender violence, and of course, I was really sensitive to all of this. But you are right that on the other hand, I had all this abolitionist tradition, so it was how to make it compatible. But I wasn't the only one. Also within the feminist movement, there were always women who were very aware that protecting the woman was going mainly to imply harsher punishments, and that harsher punishments would impact disproportionately on minorities, So I really don't claim, as I say, it forms part of the feminist movement, this distrust with the criminal justice system. So how to join them? There's no easy answer. Of course, we have tried all, we have tried to say, put them in the criminal code, but don't put them with a criminal sentence. Oh, but then they don't take it seriously. Well, suspend the sentence, or don't put a fine, or try to develop alternatives outside the criminal justice. So, of course it's difficult. But academically, it is difficult. Only if you're a politician and you say protecting more women is increasing the punishments, that's easy. But no academic subscribes this. It's just a politician slogan, with no effect, by the way.
Okay. Maybe you want to say something else about
the
feature of your feature career. You have some interest and new. What do you think you will be doing in 5, 10 years?
5, yeah.
There is some project?
Yes. No, I don't have it. I just remember that I told you that we have to do. I am interested in all the internet criminality. Remember that I'm not going to do it, but I'm interested.
You mean an interest for the Spanish criminologists?
No, but also, I really think that there's being a displacement. I think there's been, yes, I subscribe to this argument that there's being a displacement, and much of the criminality is happening in the internet. And, that it sounds really interesting. How do all those theories that were written in 1920 hold for the internet? Anomy, disorganization, control. How does all this hold? I don't know if I'm not going to do it, but if you want me to fantasize for a faraway future, I think it's an interesting topic.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's a good idea for new criminologists too.
Okay, you're right.
Thank you very much, Elena, for your work, and congratulations for being such a good criminologist.
Thank you, Pepe, for the interview.